Question is that the motion be agreed to. Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Labor Party voted for the first reading of this bill to send it to Select Committee so that we could hear public submissions and expert evidence on its provisions. We had reservations at that point, which I expressed in my first reading speech, but we thought it was appropriate to hear what the public had to say. One of the major concerns that we've had about the functioning of the interim EPA has been that it has actually been not an environmental protection agency, but a national development agency. It's so far pretty much been an understaffed office in the Ministry for the Environment, already being used to fast-track controversial projects. The Minister talks about extreme examples under the previous law and somehow thinks that this justifies the new 9-month fast-track process, even though we're hearing extraordinary reports of enormous legal bills, consulting bills, and major inconvenience accruing to parties and submitters under the 9-month rushed process, one bite at the cherry. And I know that members opposite, Mr Ockenvoll and Mr Quinn, think that public consultation is overrated, but members on this side of the House think that it's important to hear what the public have to say. And I'm going to develop those comments further, because we've already seen the fast-tracking of the Waterview connection and the timeframes for submissions there being far too short, and that's despite protests from the Eden Albert Community Board and the Auckland City Council asking for an extension of deadlines. But never mind, we have a very poor track record on local democracy on the other side of the House, and we know that what community boards and city councils think don't matter too much to people. That's right, as Miss Adams said, they just want to get on with it. They know best. They don't really care what local communities say. They just think they can hurry things through in 9 months. And the reality is that isn't acceptable to local communities. They need and they want a say in what goes on in their communities, and that is a right that we will ensure is restored to them when we have the opportunity. Now, sir, the concern that we had around the trust me approach being asked for by the Minister is really that members opposite have a bad track record on the environment. We look at the extension of the deadline for the National Environmental Standards for air quality to 2018, ignoring warnings that doing so puts people's lives at risk, Mr Tremaine. That's right, never mind about all the Kiwis that will die as a result of having to breathe poor air. Just ram it through again and don't worry about the cost, which is a summary of the record of those members. There's the watering down of the emissions trading scheme, adding billions of dollars to the taxpayers' bill for New Zealand's carbon emissions and letting polluters off just because they are polluters and they can pollute. And then, of course, there's the proposal to open up the national parks to mining, which was only stopped due to a major outcry from people. The abolition of the democratically elected Canterbury Regional Council, just so more intensive dairying could be allowed through giving them more water. There's the complete sabotage of biofuels policy, the repeal of the restriction on new baseload fossil-fuelled thermal electricity generation. I see the Acting Minister of Energy is in the House, and it was good that she conceded the other day in question time that notwithstanding she was trying to claim credit for a whole lot of new renewable energy generation, fully 4/5 of that generation had been consulted under the previous Labor government. And then there's the disastrous revision of the New Zealand energy strategy, which leaked the other day. The draft already released is short on action and has a strong focus on coal and petroleum development that shifts environmental concerns like carbon emissions to the bottom of priorities, giving the lie to the claims that were made in the Minister's initial remarks that this is a government that prioritises the environment and our environmental values but somehow balances them with the economy. That energy strategy speaks volumes to that claim, and I hope many New Zealanders will read it and see the truth about what this government's record actually is in this area. Then there's the refusal to put in place a standard for smart meters, so that instead of putting in place an incentive for consumers to be able to control their energy use in the home and in the business, there's confusion and a lack of leadership from the government in this important area. The vehicle fuel economy standard has been scrapped by National simply because they think it would just lead to an increase in cost for new vehicles. And then, of course, there's the phasing out of the old inefficient incandescent light bulbs using 75% more electricity than the new efficient eco bulbs. Well, Mr Joyce scoffs about it. Mr Joyce's favourite phrase, I can see it forming on his foaming lips at the moment, nanny state, all about control, wanting to tell New Zealanders what to do, conveniently ignoring the fact that China, that bastion of freedom of enterprise and democracy, is going to surpass New Zealand as far as energy policy is concerned very quickly. You won't be able to buy non-energy efficient bulbs anywhere, Mr Joyce, because the major manufacturer of them isn't going to make them anymore because they're so dirty. But never mind, tell people what you think they want to hear, and they'll re-elect you. That's clearly the theory. Unfortunately, on environmental matters, I think New Zealanders are too smart for that. Now, sir, at Select Committee, the concerns that we had initially around the content of the bill were actually reinforced by public submissions. We've heard a pretty vanilla version of what happened at Select Committee from the Minister. Clearly he's asked his... well, it may be Milli Vanilli, actually, Mr Calder, but that's an artist more from your generation than mine, so I'll leave you to tell the House more about that. And of course, he was a great lip syncer, as I understand. And while no doubt we'll hear more speeches from members opposite, Mr Ockenvoll and others will lip sync to the minister's tune, and read out the departmental notes and spin the lines around what's actually what they say is great for the environment and the economy under National. But as I say, voters are actually more discerning than this, and they know better. Now, the concerns around the EPA are fourfold. And I know National members don't like to listen to the facts, but here they are. First of all, the EPA isn't going to provide sectoral leadership. I know that it was the Minister's desire that it should. I know that he was well motivated about this. But the reality is he's been rolled. All that it does is get fast tracking for major projects up and running, and all it does is cobble together some functions from existing acts. The climate change legislation registry, Irma's old functions under the Has-No Act, and a few functions under the RMA under the fast tracking process. That's all the EPA gets to do, apart from those two functions mentioned by the Minister, the ozone protection and the other functions. What about the exclusive economic zone regulation that was so vaunted by the Minister? What about our Antarctic obligations? What about administering under the waste minimisation scheme all those product stewardship schemes that ought to have been brought into force by this government but haven't been so far? So, sir, the first problem with the EPA is it's just not going to be a strong sectoral leader. It's going to fail at the first hurdle because its legislation is weak and it doesn't have enough functions. The second is that its objectives are not fit for purpose. Nothing in the Act actually tells the EPA that it has to protect the environment. Well, how's that for setting up an entity for failure at the first hurdle? Then there's the lack of any independence from the Minister. Under the Has-No Act, the functions of the EPA come closer to the Crown, not more distant. Well, I don't know about other members, but I don't think I want this Minister deciding matters under the hazardous substances and new organisms legislation. Some might say that was actually a conflict of interest for him. Finally, there's the issue of obligations to Māori. There's no treaty clause in this legislation, and yet there is in every other environmental and conservation act in this country. What sort of signal does that send about the obligations of the EPA to deal with the perspectives of iwi? I want to see the Māori Party take a stand on this. Why has this omission been made? Sir, this is a major missed opportunity for the environment. The blue-green agenda is bankrupt, and this is not a body that we can support.
Chris Ockenvoll.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise